Hello, welcome to another episode of What the Flock. So today, in honor of our guest, Dr. Steve Hassan, I'm going to read one of his favorite quotes that you can actually find on his website, but I love it. It's to the point. I know but one freedom, and that is the freedom of mind. That's a quote by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. And I'm going to pass the ball to Hoyt here to introduce the wonderful Dr. Hassan.
Yes, welcome, Dr. Steve Hassan. I can call him Steve because we're friends for a long time.
Call me Steve.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did the doctoral dive.
Yes, but I'm very proud that you did that, though. And I'm going to take the time to brag about you. Here's some things I found on your website, kind of giving you a little brief background. Stephen Hassan is an expert on undue influence, brainwashing, and unethical hypnosis, and the author of the best-selling book, Combating Cult Mind Control, which I will talk later about how that helped my life, and I think yours as well, Shel. I mean,
completely.
He is a licensed mental health professional, cult expert, and undue influence expert with professional experience in the United States and abroad, including consulting, coaching, speaking, media appearances, activism, writing, researching, teaching, intervention, and recovery services, and expert consulting and witness work to assist individuals and families with problems related to undue influence. His expertise includes undue influence in cases of destructive one-on-one relationships, families, parental alienation, mini-cults, religious cults, therapy and self-improvement groups, professional abuse, institutional abuse, corporations, multi-level marketing, political groups, human trafficking, hate and violent extremism, and other situations. He writes and speaks out about the importance of viewing terrorist groups as destructive cults. He has helped thousands of individuals and families recover from undue influence, myself included. And with over 40 years of experience, he is sought out after as one of the most foremost authorities of undue influence by controlling groups and individuals. Steve understands the subject from a unique perspective of both a former cult member who was deprogrammed in 1976 and as a clinical professional who has devoted his life to helping others. Welcome to the show, Steve.
Wow, I'm tired.
Yeah.
I'm tired. I'm ready to nap after all that.
I could go on. Like that was a
that was more than enough. But to cut to the chase, I got burned by the Moonies, and once my family rescued me and I understood what happened to me, I was pissed. Yeah. And I also was confused and wanted to understand what happened to me. Or as you say, what the flock happened to me? And so talking with Lifton and Singer and the experts, they kind of dished it back to me and said, well, you've experienced it directly. We've just studied it secondhand.
Right.
And here I am 45 years later, working as hard as I can because I'm so worried about the state of the planet right now.
Well, it's one of those things that I'd be curious to get your impression. I mean, there obviously you referenced some of those great experts, but it seems like the movement, I would say, in the last few decades is really about ex-members coming forward and being the direct, experienced people that can then kind of get educated like you have, and they become kind of the forefront of this movement of trying to educate people and really tell it from the bird's eye point of view of I went through it. And I think it's a very powerful mechanism. I certainly know I feel empowered by talking about the subject, having been someone who lived through it. So would you say that's basically the case?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing is that I think you'll echo this, but if it didn't happen to me, I'd never believe that an intelligent, educated person from a good family could get into something like this. And so, like so many other, and the title is called Wounded Healer Models, like people who experience something horrible and then they realize, you know what? No one else should have to do what I had to do in terms of being in this horrible experience and getting out. So if you think about it, I mean, people have loved ones with a rare disease, and if they have the ability, they create a foundation to do research to cure that disease. And it's a version, I mean, mind control is a virus. It's a psychological virus that hacks people's lives and minds.
And their ability to critically think, right? Yeah, exactly. Well, I can say from my personal point of view, it was Steve's book that I read when I was at my as they call the lowest of lows, when you hit rock bottom, and I didn't know what was going on in my life. And I'd given up all hope of what I'd possibly been involved in, that I was ready to even consider the fact that it might be a cult, because I considered that to be impossible at the time. And I went online and I found the best-selling book on, cults, and it was Combating Cult Mind Control. And I opened that book, and the first, I think, 50 pages was describing how you got indoctrinated by the Moonies. And I could have just changed the names. I was like, holy shit. I mean, I really realized, like, that was my aha moment to saying, oh my God, I've been in a cult, and I've been resisting this idea, just largely because I was ignorant. I didn't know how cults work. I didn't know anything about it.
Right.
And
nobody thinks they're in a cult. When I was in the Moonies, everyone kept saying I was in a cult, and I knew I wasn't in a cult, and I knew I wasn't brainwashed. In my case, I fell asleep at the wheel of a Mooney fundraising van after 3 days of no sleep, and woke up as I was driving 80 miles an hour into the back of a tractor trailer truck. But what made me agree to an intervention was the challenge my father gave to me when I said, I'm not in a cult, I'm not brainwashed. He said, prove it. Just give us a few days with an open mind, listen to these ex-members, and think. Yeah. And if you want to go back, at least your mother and I will be able to sleep at night knowing we did the responsible thing. And I was so sure I wasn't brainwashed.
Sure.
Well,
absolutely.
I'll prove it to you. Duh.
Well, thankfully that did happen. And I think it's also good to go back to the beginning, because I know the story well, but the audience doesn't, of how they found you and where you were at that time. It's always, I'd like to call it a perfect storm. And so, I'd love you to kind of just take us back to how it all began.
So, meaning my girlfriend dumping me in 1973, and me being, down, and being at the student union at Queens College. I was an upper junior and creative writing major. And I was sitting at a cafeteria, and 3 attractive women asked if they could share my table. And they were dressed like students and carried books like students. And I thought it was my lucky day.
Sure.
And little did I know. And this is a part of my healing strategy when I'm working with former members, is a redo history technique, where you have to think, if I knew then what I know now, what would I say or do differently?
Right.
And going back in time to that moment, can we sit at your table? No. I know all about Sun Myung Moon. I know you're liars. I know you're not students.
Right.
Get the flock off of me before I call security.
Exactly.
But to answer your question, I didn't. I was maybe arrogant 19-year-old who had bicycled cross country when I was 16 and thought I knew it all. And I was curious. And when they said, oh, come over for dinner and meet our friends from all over the world, I was like, cool.
Yeah. Sure.
Why not? I had no idea what I was getting into. And that's a very important point. I want to just take a second and say to all your listeners, without deception or withholding information that's vital or distorting it to make it palatable, like if all groups told you in the beginning who they are, what they believe, and what to expect, then we could think about having informed consent.
Exactly.
Taking that first step.
Totally.
But it ain't how it works. And they literally, it's phishing.
Yeah.
And getting the person interested, engaging their motivation, finding everything about their past. And I'm going to do a small tangent and get back to to answer your question, Hoyt, but just say, things are so different now than they were in the 70s before the internet, because now there's some 5,000 data points that have been collected on every adult in the United States, and there are algorithms. And if a group has the money and buys your data, they can figure out what buttons to press.
Wow.
When I was in the Moonies, and I know Chele and Hoyt, you had this experience when you were recruiting, you had to elicit the information from the people directly. And, you know, so it was much more in-person engaging. Now we have smartphones and people are getting totally indoctrinated online.
Sure.
And reinforced. So back to my story. Long story short, I was a banquet waiter on the weekends, and I worked every weekend for 2.5 years. And that very weekend, after they were pressuring me to go away with them, we're going to have so much fun this weekend, and nothing about mentioning the Unification Church or a workshop. Oh, we're going to have so much fun. You got to come. And I was like, I work on the weekend. I'm sorry. I work on the weekend. Well, that very weekend, first time in 2.5 years, I called my boss. When do I show up? Because I was doing banquet waitering. Steve, you won't believe it, but they called the wedding off. Take the weekend off.
The perfect storm.
And I was like, oh my goodness. Am I meant to go on this trip with these cute women that I met?
Destiny.
You know,
destiny. Yeah.
Why not? Maybe it's meant to be.
Yeah.
And so that wound up being a 3-day workshop. They had lied to me. I thought it was 2 days. They told me on Sunday night, no. The most important day is tomorrow.
Oh, boy.
And then after the third day finished, they were like, we're starting the 7-day workshop tomorrow morning. At which point I got angry and I said, I need to leave. And I'm going to get really violent if you don't take me back. And they kept me for a few more hours, but they did drive me back. But they had already put in my head, but Steve, what if? What if? What if God is working in the world right now? Would you betray God? You know, and they just worked that one really well. So when I got home, I was confused. My parents said, where were you? We worried. I said, I was upstate New York at Tarrytown at a multi-million-dollar estate. They said, you look like you're high on drugs. I said, I don't think they gave me any drugs because I was sleep deprived too and hypnotized. And my mother's reaction was, let's go talk to the rabbi. And I'm like, fine, let's go talk to the rabbi, who is useless. But they had put in my head the possibility, and they do this thing of what if it's true? You know?
Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, you can more or less reframe someone mentally in like 48 hours, right? I mean, isn't that kind of an established kind of in 2 days you can kind of rewire someone a bit like you're describing? I mean,
so my experience is it can be done much faster if you know what you're doing and if you know the person well. But in terms of the exiting process, my experience when I'm doing interventions is it really takes 3 days, not 2, because there's a cumulative effect that happens. But a critical thing for a case to be successful is the person agreeing not to be on the cell phone and in contact with the group during those 3 days, to just take a mental time out. You know, and consider the possibilities. Yes, maybe this is the greatest group on earth, or maybe I'm doing God's will or whatever, or maybe I've been deceived and somebody's messed with my head. In any case, what I want your listeners to know is that if something is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny. Therefore, don't delay poking it, challenging it, doing independent research. Do it right away. And don't rely on the recruiters or the indoctrinators only for answers, because they'll always twist things to keep you involved with the cult.
Well, and if I can jump in here, Steve, hello, by the way,
Hi.
again. So great to see your face all the time. I wanted to, and I've shared this with you before, but I don't know if you remember. The first time I heard your name was from the pulpit from Kip McKean, of course, from the ICOC. We were at the downtown LA Biltmore Hotel, and he was preaching hard on not listening to anybody outside of the church. So your name came up, of course, as a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that if we listen to you, that we are partaking in spiritual pornography. And you could hear the in the audience, right? Just like, so if we, in those days, again, no internet, this was way back when, if we even listened to someone else, unfortunately, we didn't have Google, because that would have saved a lot of us a lot of hell, right? Because now you look up his name or ICOC and it's just cult, down the page after page, and there's recovery groups and what have you. But the fact that I heard your name then, and then when a mutual female friend of ours that you literally saved her life, you know who I'm talking about, I used to be in charge of her in the cult. So when she shared what you had counseled her on and helped her with, that's how I was fortunate enough to meet you. And of course, read the same book, Combating Mind Control. And then you introduced me to Hoyt. So I just wanted to take a second to just publicly thank you, because this amazing worldwide growing group we have now of from survivor to thriver, that in my opinion, you've spearheaded and continue to lead the charge on, it has really saved me in so many ways. So I always chuckle at the fact that Kip is preaching, stay away from this man. And now I'm like, oh, you mean the man that helped save my life? And he's saying, stay away from you.
Yeah, and my recollection is he marked me and told people would be in sin if they communicated with me or read the book. And I think he said Buddy Martin also, who is a Christian pastor in the mainline Church of Christ, who I did a ton of cases with, and who, by the way, I credit because it was his idea to change the 4 components of mind control in my original edition of Combating. It was his idea to say, if you call it the bite model, you just switch the order, people will remember it better.
Yes.
I was like, buddy.
Yeah, it's great. It's
Thank
really
you,
great.
dude.
Yes.
Yeah.
Way to go. So it's now the bite model.
Which is a great segue. Let's talk about the bite model. I mean, I didn't know you were a porn star from the past, but that's good to know.
No, but I also want to just mention that the woman I helped had left the cult after 13 years, same cult as you, Shelley, and had been in and out of psych hospitals for 11 years, misdiagnosed and given medications. And when she read Combating, she said, you wrote about the cult I was in. I'm wondering if you can help. And I asked to speak with her psychiatrist and psychologist and spoke with them. And they're like, she's the most functional and least functional person we've ever known in 30 years. If you can help her, please do. So she came to Boston and we did an intensive of 6-hour days, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. And by the end, she had no impulses to want to hurt herself or commit suicide. And she knew she didn't need any meds. So she talked to the psychiatrist to get off everything. And as she was like coming back to herself, she said, I want to help my friend Shelley.
She knew I needed it bad.
Yeah.
Who is that?
Yeah.
Is it okay, Steve, to introduce you? And I'm like, sure, well, of course.
Oh, great.
So that's a little bit more, because it's really important to understand people are leaving cults and they're hoping mental health professionals are going to help them. But unless mental health people are trained specifically to work with cult members, their wind-up can make things worse.
I ended up, I went down that road for a little while, and everyone just wanted to put me on so many different drugs and antidepressants, and that's just not how I wanted to live my life, obviously. Yeah.
And I'm not anti-meds, but usually short-term help people sleep, lower anxiety, but the underlying problem is what was done to their minds.
Correct.
Whether they were born in a cult or recruited into a cult.
Right.
So let me just finish before we get into the bite, if I may, and just say I was, had this, what I thought was a spiritual experience where God was telling me to go back to the group to learn more. And it was in that period that one of the top leaders picked me up and decided to groom me as his disciple. As Jesus had 12 disciples, I was one of his 12. And so I was all of a sudden groomed by the top leadership. And the appeal that worked for this, arrogant young person in 19 was, Steve, you're so special. You're so smart.
Sure.
We're going to make the world a Garden of Eden, and God wants you to be a leader of the world. Yeah. And I was like, well, I can write poetry and be a college professor, or I can save the world and end violence and poverty and crime.
Right. Yeah.
And my 10 generations of my ancestors stuck at low levels in the spirit world can be liberated. But it's my choice.
Right.
Sure. Okay.
Sure.
I think I'll take.
I think I'll take door number one.
So 27 months I was held up as the model member.
Wow.
Slept 3 to 4 hours a night and was recruiting people, indoctrinating them, doing political activism. And I basically became a right-wing fascist. Like I had a complete reversal of my belief system before the cult. And so when I had that accident and got out, I was like, what the fuck?
No, exactly. But what's also interesting, we try to cover in this, because obviously in everyone who's been through a cult, there's inherent negative things we all endured. But it's also, I think, important to talk about what makes us stay. Like, what were the positives? Because if you don't offset with what the things that kept us there, then it sounds like we were all, masochists to be in this environment where all these horrible things are happening. So I'm kind of curious, looking back on it, what were the things that you would say were the positives that kind of kept you there for as long as you were there?
Oh, that's a great question. And as a therapist, I just want to say that when you're helping someone exit, it's always important to mine the good things.
Right, exactly.
Out of the person's experience. Like I learned I was very shy and introverted, if you can believe that.
Yeah.
And, for me to read a poem to 15 people in a class was a major effort.
Right.
And in the Moonies, I was speaking to 1,000 people. Amazing. No problem.
Amazing. Yeah. No, it's great.
That was just one of the many things I learned. Right. I learned how to run a business. I was making $1,000 a day doing the street fundraising, using a lot of deception.
Right.
Let's see. I learned to eat sushi in the Moonies in 1974, which is still one of my favorite foods, even though they're one of the major suppliers of sushi in America.
Oh, good.
What else? I learned a lot about the Bible and about people from over the world.
Right.
That was another positive. But I want to add, I think you'll appreciate this comment, but that mind control is a bi-directional process. Let's say this is the recruiter, right? So the new person is hearing, and really good recruiters do very open-ended kinds of things that invites the person to project meaning into what they're hearing,
right? To
create a story that's going to work for them.
Becomes their own.
It becomes their own, exactly. Unlike a case like Patty Hearst is kidnapped out of her apartment and thrown into a trunk and put in a closet and raped. And early Patty is like, I don't want to be here. These people are dangerous, right? But then she had to, for survival mechanisms, the trauma bonding and all of that. What we experienced was much more the illusion of choice. But the key thing is that people, when they're in a mind control cult, they're following their own story, their own movie of what they think the group is about.
Yeah.
That
and there are real variations. even amongst the same cult.
Sure.
Of what exactly that is. And that's why a customized approach is so vital to really help people.
No, absolutely. I mean, just talking to my former members, everyone had their own experience. I mean, even though we were all there for a lot of us at the same time, the same players, everyone has their own experience.
Well, they have this story in their mind of the experience.
Right.
That's where the therapy comes in, talking to your buddies who are also out.
Right.
When you hear them telling their stories, it makes you reassess what you thought was happening at that particular session with the cult leader or whatever. So, again, the cure to blind faith is perspective, right?
Yeah.
And learning about other cults, but also hearing from people who are in your cult in different levels, different points in the pyramid and the circles at the base of the pyramid helps you get perspective to see the whole thing instead of just taking your own experience and projecting what you think the group is through that smaller lens.
Yeah, exactly.
Such a great point. Yeah.
Well, let's jump into the bite model then, because I think it's such a great tool to really
So very briefly, as I was learning Lifton, Singer, Shine, West, and studying social psychology and everything else, I really wanted to understand how this all happened and how I was effective, etc. And I came early on across Leon Festinger's cognitive dissonance work and the 1950s book that he wrote, When Prophecy Fails, which was about a flying saucer cult, and people were selling their homes and going up to a mountaintop because the saucer was going to pick them up and the world would be destroyed.
Right.
But when it didn't happen, people believed more. And that's where he came up with cognitive dissonance theory, that essentially human beings like to be congruent. They want their beliefs and feelings and behaviors to be in alignment. And if you get people to do an extreme behavior, there's a rationalizing function that automatically happens, and your emotions align to justify the extreme behavior.
Right.
So we are not rational beings as humans. We're rationalizing beings.
Yes, I think that's a great point.
Getting back to the story, I was thinking, thoughts, feelings, behaviors. Thoughts, feelings, behaviors. I wonder if I go through Lifton, Singer, all the models, and organize what behaviors can be placed under each one of these. So, for example, Lifton has loaded language, which is, platitudinous buzzwords that cults use. Well, that's a thought control thing. Okay, I put it under there. So what emerged was a list of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors.
Right.
And then I kept thinking, there's something missing. What's missing? And then I put together, information control. Yeah. Because no one would get in if there wasn't lying. And no one would stay in if you weren't programmed against critics and former members and negative information.
Right.
So things started to coalesce as these four overlapping components: behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control, could then be placed along a continuum. Sorry for the reflection, but there's healthy influence, where you have informed consent that respects your individuality, your conscience, your creativity. It's love-based. It's really encouraging you to be your best self. And the more bite model stuff that you tick off, the more authoritarian control you can see. So, we can talk about, sleep deprivation, privacy deprivation, rigid rules and regulations, need for dependency and obedience. So you can go through the four overlapping components and get to authoritarian control, which is what my dissertation was focused on in terms of the law itself. Because for me, the thing that's been missing is that the law is about 100 years out of date with what we now understand about psychology.
Yep.
So we need to update those laws, right?
We need to update that law. And what I did in the dissertation was I connected the dots with trafficking.
Right.
Sex and labor trafficking, which is fraud, force, and coercion, right? And it's an internationally recognized crime that affects some 47 million people, I believe, was the last number I remember that was assembled by the UN. Most of them are labor trafficked. But I've been connecting the bite model to coercion.
Right.
In fact, with labor trafficking officials for the U.S. government that are very excited to know about my model. So if we can create a framework where judges can evaluate the influencer, the influencee, and their vulnerabilities, and typically the influencer is a malignant narcissist. Right. If I was going to make a stereotypical generalization.
Right.
Right. If you can explain this and explain this, then you can talk about motive, opportunity, results, and you can plug in the bite model. The more the bad actor was influencing the susceptible person.
So
please, Your Honor, this is undue influence.
Right.
Please put the predator in jail, which happened with Keith Raniere for 120 years, and recently R. Kelly.
Right.
And I don't think he's been sentenced yet, but I'm so thrilled that these models are starting to find their way into the legal system.
It's great. And does that involve doing like an evaluation of the players? Is that how it's really done? I mean, how do you assess that you've got the malignant narcissist and you've got the influencee, so to speak?
That's the hard part.
Is that
so it's actually, for cults that have been around for a while, one can just read the writings or listen to the ravings of a cult leader to get all of the grandiosity, need for admiration, thinks they're above the law.
Right.
You can get that without having to sit the person down and do a forensic evaluation, actually.
Oh, good.
And I actually did a chapter 3 in The Cult of Trump, comparing Donald Trump with Jim Jones, Hubbard of Scientology, and the Moon. Sun Myung Moon, my former cult leader, because the patterns are so
similar,
stereotypical.
Right.
Now, I'm part of a forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School called the Program in Psychiatry and the Law. And when I first did a presentation for them, and then I was later invited to attend, they said, you need to go get a doctorate, and you need to do a quantitative study on your work, because you can say that it works, but science doesn't work that way. Anecdotal evidence is only anecdotal. So we did the first quantitative study, but it's really groundbreaking in the sense that there's never been a scientific instrument proposed, much less that came up with a powerful factor analysis, that can be applied in a uniform way, which is what the law really wants. It wants a standard that everything can be measured by.
A precedent, almost, yeah.
And there are what they explained to me is there are two ways the laws change. One is the body of scientific evidence, like talking to all social scientists and them all saying, yes, undue influence exists. Yes, here's how we can describe it and identify it, etc. That's one way. We're still years from there, unfortunately. The other is precedent-setting cases, which we now have with Raniere and R. Kelly, I believe.
Absolutely.
Steve, if I can jump in for a second, maybe with people that aren't as familiar with the BITE model, can you just go through what each letter stands for to spell BITE?
Sure. B stands for behavior control. So regulating sleep, regulating food, your clothing, where you live, who you associate with, rigid rules and regulations. But the most important thing with behavior control is dependence and obedience. That's the goal of behavior control, is complete compliance. And typically cult leaders want power, money, and sex, and not necessarily all. and not necessarily in that order, although I would generalize. Power is always, money is usually, and sex is usually, unfortunately.
Like Ranieri.
Right?
Yeah.
Information control is all about information. So the way a group recruits, if it's deceptive, lying, withholding information or distorting it, making people tattle on each other, spy on each other, telling people they can only tell their upline negative things, they can't tell to anyone else. You stay away from critical literature or former members. So there's all this information control stuff. And then the T is thought control. And the stereotypical frame for thought control is that you have an ideology that's looked at as the truth with a capital T. It's not just a doctrine. It's not just a map describing reality. It's the truth.
Right.
And it's typically black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, us versus them. It's very simplistic. And then within thought control, thought stopping, which is a behavior mod technique that I was trained to do as a Mooney.
Yeah.
And many of my clients and people that I've interviewed have talked about blocking any doubts.
Sure.
Like doubts are evil. And especially in cults that say, oh, if you just believe 100%, it will magically appear. The universe will deliver it. Right. Right, under thought control. So the idea is behavior control, information, thought control, and then the emotional control is making you feel special, love bombing, making you feel like you're an elite, you're chosen. But mostly it's about guilt and fear manipulation. And the single universal one in under the E, the emotional control, is what I call phobia indoctrination, which is the indoctrination of irrational fears that if you leave the group or even question the leader, terrible things are going to happen to you.
Sure.
And in my book, Freedom of Mind, in chapter 10, I have 4 pages single-spaced of the most common phobias that I've worked with over 45 years. If you leave, you'll get cancer. If you leave, you'll be a drug addict. If you leave, you'll commit suicide.
Yeah.
So in other words, when you're under mind control, when you think of leaving, you can only generate negative movies and stories in your head. You can't imagine happy and healthy, spiritual.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So, but the 4 things, behavior control, information, thought, and emotional control together, because many of them overlap.
Right.
Along the influence continuum, anyone can self-diagnose a controlling relationship,
Right.
for example, or a boss that is a malignant narcissist, or a religious group, a political group, a therapy group, a large group awareness training group, multi-level marketing, all the things you kindly listed when you introduced me.
Yeah.
It really is a frame because we're humans and we use our minds, right, to interact with reality. If you can put a virus in someone's mind and hack it, it's similar to, somebody injecting malware into your computer operating system.
Yeah. No, exactly.
You can't expect it to work normally.
It's a great analogy.
And it makes me think about a point you brought up earlier of where when people come out of these groups, whatever way they get out, it's sometimes difficult to find the right help, whether a mental health, practitioner. And would you also say, I'm kind of curious, to me, like it was a huge thing to even discover I'd been in a cult. And I think a lot of people get out of these groups and never even identify what they've been in. Would you say that's kind of accurate, or how would
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So in my work, I just say, first of all, there's a difference between people born or raised in an authoritarian cult and people like myself who was recruited at 19. Why? Because I had a pretty strong personality and identity and value system by 19. So I had a reference point to go back to. But when you're coming, if you're raised in that environment, you don't know what's normal.
Right, right.
You think it's normal to be hit with a paddle
Right. Yeah.
If you're fidgeting at church, like, huh? We know corporal punishment is trauma.
Right. Exactly.
Like it does brain damage to children, and yet it's still, not illegal in the United States. It is in other countries, but not in the U.S. But the thing that worked about my book, and this is a problem with combating in the current generation, because young people don't remember the mass weddings. They don't know who the Moonies are.
Right.
I mean, they've surfaced again through the son, Sean Moon, with his bullets, his golden bullet crown, and his AR-15, and he's training people for civil war in the United States. So younger people are learning. But like Hoyt, you were like, oh, I know the Moonies are a cult. Let me check out this Hassan guy.
Yeah.
What the Moonies are about.
I mean, it actually took me the point of view of like, well, that's something that I would never get involved with, because I was like, I don't know if I can listen to this guy. I mean, that was my.
But that's why. Yeah, exactly. But Jehovah's Witnesses.
The
Moonies are a cult. They read it and they're like, I underlined the whole book.
Exactly.
Wait a minute.
Exactly.
Or the Mormons or any number of other groups where there's so many people who are raised in it. But what I say to all your listeners is, if you have anybody that you care about in your life, mother, father, sister, brother, best friend, boyfriend, girlfriend, that raises the question, do you think you're spending too much time or too much money? Or, you seem to be being more deceptive, or we've noticed a radical personality change. Could you please investigate it? If there's anyone in your life raising that question, right, it's them that should say, hey, would you mind checking out WhaTheFlok podcast? Let's listen to it together. Right. Yeah. Like, what do you think? Yeah. And then that will speed up the process. But the problem is most families, they just don't get it. And in fact, they did 10 errant beliefs that I wrote about in Freedom of Mind and that I put on my website, which are what I've encountered as roadblocks to families and friends helping someone that they care about in a cult. Things like, well, he's an adult. Right. Or he says he's happy. Right. Of course. Or he's too smart for this, or he'll leave when he can. I mean, and if you understood mind control and the fact that your friend or loved one was deceived and their brain was hacked, then you have to change gears. Exactly. Wait a minute. All of those assumptions that would work in the real world normally, you got to put those aside. Yeah. Right. Well, and I recently talked with a fellow who had been recruited around the time I was in the Moonies, Ed Kaufman, and he was in 36 years. Wow. And I heard him on a podcast using a pseudonym. I actually interviewed him, and I'm raising his name because he just passed away. Okay. And we've lost someone who was dedicated to researching the early days of the Moonies, because he really has spent a lot of years, because he wanted to figure it out. Didn't read my book. Why? Most ex-Moonies are still afraid of me. Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. I'm like, vampire. Steve's got horns or something. Right. Well, and that's what we're trying to do with our show is to build awareness through having people tell their stories, so that these themes that you've illuminated, become more common and more relatable, because people are telling them how that actually played out in their lives. And I think, we're just trying to make it cool to talk about your cultic relationship. And as you even wrote in your books, the most common form is even the one-on-one relationship, so that we've all more or less on some level encountered some sort of controlling abusive relationship. The people here on this podcast, we've all had the more extreme version, but it's all relatable, and we just want to make it kind of more acceptable that people have. Yeah, and I want to plug Adam Grant's book, Think Again. Okay, great. There's nothing about cults in it, but he's a social psychologist, and he said things that are so important for our population, like disconnect your ego from your beliefs. Nice. And adopt a seeking truth frame. for your life. Like, be open to other points of view. Don't give up your point of view because someone is charismatic and, you know, is talking with great certainty. Certainty, the more certain a person is, the more your antenna should go up. Red alert.
Yes.
Red alert.
Right.
No, I say the same thing. I think the people who are the brightest are the quickest to say, you know, oh, I don't know. That's a great point. Let me think about that. Right.
Or what I advise to people who were in QAnon and other conspiracy cults, that I advise family members and friends, is engage in that truth-seeking frame. Hey, listen, I respect you. I love you. You're smart. You're accomplished. I don't believe what you believe, but I'm open to being persuaded. Right. But I need facts.
Yeah.
Right.
And if you're open to this interaction with me, I'm telling you, I'm open to being persuaded. Are you open to?
Right.
Oh, no, I'm open. Great. You take one thing, let's watch it together and discuss it. Then I take one thing, we watch it together and discuss it until we figure out who's got the proof.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey,
because if it's legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny, right?
Exactly.
Right. And on that note, and I know you have, you know, you have a hard out here, and we promised you a time limit. How much time do you have left on your end? A couple minutes?
I have 15 minutes.
Okay. Well, I have a question. I have a couple friends in Scientology. So I was going to ask you a question about that, because it's baffling to me that with Leah Remini and all the work she's done, and I know you've been on her show, I think even on the round table.
The A&E one and the podcast.
Right, right. Why can't our legal system and, quite frankly, the IRS take all of that information that has been paraded in front of them hundreds of times and do something about how that organization is able to still abuse people and take their money and then have exempt status with the IRS? Because they're clearly making a lot of money and investing in real estate.
They weren't deemed a religion for 25 years, and they went to war against the IRS.
I remember that.
And they dug up dirt, and they did a lot of, you know, dirty stuff to lie to the officials to get the status. And I want to do a shout out to Jeffrey Augustine and the ScientologyMoneyProject.com.
Okay.
Because the quest is to get rid of the tax exemption status. I also want to mention Denise Brennan, formerly Larry Brennan. I have interviews, video interviews with him and her as she transitioned to be a woman. And she was told personally by Hubbard to make it into a religion.
Wow.
And when he was Larry, of course, you know, Hubbard was a homophobe. So like, Larry couldn't be his true self there. But he told me, I mean, I have a long interview with him before he passed away of a heart attack. She passed away of a heart attack of like armies of lawyers organized to do this thing. But the bottom line, it was corrupt. And the whole legal system of how the IRS determines it has been undermined and corrupted. So there's a fledgling new consumer business protection agency. Elizabeth Warren was involved with getting that set up. But by no means do we have the political clout yet to change the law and include undue influence. But then once that's done, starting to prosecute groups like Scientology, for example, for labor trafficking.
Right. That's what I was going to say.
In my professional opinion, they are labor trafficked. I was labor trafficked by the Moonies. Sure. I never got paid.
I think we all were, actually.
21 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Same here.
I made a fortune for them. So, but we're working on it, but we need more help. If you're listening to this thing and you have some influence or you have some connections,
yes,
it's really going to need a massive educational effort to get on the same page, instead of like, well, they're an adult or they have a right to their opinions. Well, I have the right to also say the Moonies infringed on my religious freedom by lying to me to get me in. You know, and you can't do equivalencies when one side is being criminal and undoing the system of checks and balances and laws.
Right.
So we have a lot of work to do, but I want to just say I really believe that the three of us are representative of millions of Americans who have experienced undue influence. And if we do like the hashtag I got out effort, and if more people are sharing their stories, we could organize, and we've tasted what it's like to lose your freedom. To be controlled by another person or group. We need to share that with other people who just are oblivious.
Right.
They don't get how precious freedom is. But I don't have to ask permission to go to the bathroom.
No, exactly.
You know?
No.
Can I have permission to visit my family? My mom's in the hospital. No, God needs you here.
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah.
It's my mom. Bye.
Right.
I'm leaving. You know,
I could not agree with you more on that. That's exactly why we're doing this. Exactly. So,
and that's why I said yes when my friend Hoyt and my friend Chele said, please do this podcast. I'm like, yes, please.
Yes.
And we want to do the Hollywood project, right? We want more celebrities who are victims, people with millions of social media followers. We want them speaking out.
And feeling comfortable to do so and having a safe space. And that's another reason Hoyt and I were excited about this. It's just the domino effect is what we're hoping for. Absolutely.
Yeah, the tipping point.
Yes.
Right?
And
I feel like we're here, like we're soon. And it's going to either tip in a good direction or a really bad one. So I'm doing everything.
I'm going with the good direction.
Yeah.
Me too. I'm an optimist. And there's no option to say, oh, you know what? It's all messed up. I'm going to go fishing. Or I'm checking out. I'm going to do video games instead of like using my knowledge and my creativity and my network.
And your voice.
Contribute.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, as usual, Dr. Hassan, amazing. I was taking notes. I'm just continuing to learn. So I'm personally very grateful, incredibly grateful for you and for Hoyt.
Well,
so I'm very proud to be a part of the From Survivor to Thriver community.
That's right.
I wear that like a badge.
Yeah,
that's for sure. Yes, for sure.
It's a wonderful thing. You're beautiful, you're smart, you have an incredible story. So does Hoyt's, of course, the first male supermodel on the planet. And you don't need to know that from my words. You just can look at his pictures and go, he kissed Cindy Crawford and all these other supermodels.
Just another day at the office. Dude. Yeah. Like, Steve, it's so great to see you as always. You're one of my dear friends. And I'm so happy that you do the work you do, and you are absolutely, contributing to all of us, kind of figuring things out and giving as you said, the information that was so vital. Because as I was saying to Chele, you can't save or help anyone, but people save and help themselves, and they do it through getting information. And the information you've provided and put out there in the world has absolutely given people the opportunity to change their lives. So I can't thank you enough for that. Keep up the great work. I look forward to seeing you soon. And,
it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
And, if someone's listening to this and you've just realized you were in a cult, I would encourage you to not state it to the group yet, and do your homework and get some support and make an exit strategy, because you might be able to help some of your friends and family to get out of the situation. And, life's precious, and people come out and they want to make up for lost time. Yeah. And I say to them, the mind is, and this is what was told to me, by the way, in 1976. Steve, this therapist, said to me, Steve, the mind is like a muscle. Think about it. If you broke your arm and your arm was in the cast as soon as the cast comes off, your muscles atrophied. Like you need to do physical therapy and build it up. Think about that too with your mind. I know I needed to like read a dictionary and reteach myself words, and I needed to force myself to concentrate to be able to read again, because my mind wasn't reading for 2.5 years.
Sure.
And I was only using buzzwords and crap from the cult.
Right.
And I just needed to reclaim my power. If you said to Steve in 76, one day you'll get a doctorate, I'd be like, you crazy? Even a master's. I got my first master's in 85.
Right.
And I got my second master's in 2019, or 2020 rather. Who knew?
Yeah.
But I got smarter by doing an education.
Right.
And that's another thing. People say, oh, Steve, I'm 30 years old. It's too late to go back to college. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Are you
Never
kidding
too
me?
late.
Never.
30?
Never. Yeah.
And when I entered the doctoral program, I said, I'm 63. And they said, oh, meet I forget her name, Charlotte. She's 77. That
Great.
shut me up real fast.
Nice.
I love
Well,
it.
if people need to reach you, what's the best way for them to find your information?
You know, I'm so busy right now, but I'm trying to generate lots of content for free on my freedomofmind.com site and my YouTube and
Nice.
social media messaging. And I'm hoping, I did a course that's 3.5 hours. It's very inexpensive, like understanding cults, basics of 101. So I would start there. And if you have a story about a cult that hasn't been told, start by writing it, because writing is therapeutic for your own journey.
Absolutely.
And I recommend a chronological journal type diary thing of, this is how I got in, this is what I thought I was in, this is how I got out. And in many of my videos, I talk about strategies to heal.
Great.
So,
Nice.
Wonderful.
Nice.
Well, thank you again
continued success, guys.
Well, thank you, Steve.
We'll talk soon.
We'll be in touch.
Right, great.
Thanks so much. And to all of our listeners, remember, you own your mind, you own your heart. No one else should have control of those except you. We'll see you next time.
All right.
Exactly.
Bye. Bye,
Bye-bye,
Dr.
Steve.
Hassan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.